Later.
How many children have been sexually assaulted by human traffickers under the Biden administration?
Senator, this is precisely why we instituted.
I don't want to lecture. It's a question. How many children have been sexually assaulted by human traffickers under your administration?
Senator, this is exactly why on January 5th we announced the parole
Do you know
program.
how many? Do you know how many children have been sexually assaulted?
This is why.
Okay, you're going to refuse to answer that question as well.
Whoa. So it seems as if United States Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas has been impeached. Wow. Before I give my input on the whole situation, I'm going to go through a fire sequence of videos, and hopefully it's to shed light as to why he got impeached and whether or not you agree with his impeachment. All right. If you like videos like this, please like, subscribe, comment down below, do all that YouTube stuff. But let's just get right into it, y'all.
Everybody's saying that impeaching Mayorkas is a ridiculous idea. I don't think so. I think it's perfectly fair. When you have a cabinet level official who has abdicated their responsibility and their oath to the Constitution, then impeachment's appropriate. I've been to the southern border. The dirty little secret is that the Remain in Mexico policy, it's still on the books. It's just that they're not enforcing it. That's a failure of Mayorkas. That's a failure of the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. And you want to actually have a federal district court judge recently, look at that, who ordered DHS to stop cutting the barbed wire so people could come in illegally. What are they now doing? They're using bulldozers to raise it so people can crawl under.
What?
That's not an error. That's intentional. And when you have an intentional violation of the rule of law that you swear an oath to uphold, then yes, impeachment is an appropriate option. I think it's perfectly appropriate to initiate impeachment proceedings against Mayorkas. People shouldn't focus on nitpicking the response. They should focus on actually the extreme threat that we already face in this country. Americans are suffering by the day. I think that we're facing risks we haven't faced in a generation, from illegal and special interest aliens crossing that southern border. That falls at the feet of the failed administrative state. In this case, that's the Department of Homeland Security. Mayorkas deserves to be held accountable. Do it.
Yeah, I heard that. Let's check this next one out.
He is now officially impeached. And I'm not talking about President Biden. For the first time in 150 years, on their second try, House Republicans were finally successful in impeaching Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. But he's never going to be convicted, and I will explain why in a second. First, the final vote in the House tonight was razor thin, 214 to 213. All Republicans voting yes, all Democrats voting no, along with the same three Republicans who voted no last week: Representative Ken Buck of Colorado, Representative Tom McClintock of California, and Representative Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin. Now, I mentioned this was the Republicans' second attempt at getting this impeachment passed. That's because, as I told you in this video last week, in a rather embarrassing incident, the Republican majority failed to pass this very same bill with these two articles of impeachment for Mayorkas. But now that the numbers were in their favor tonight, because Representative Steve Scalise is now back to work, they were able to get it done. Last week, Scalise was not present and not voting because he was undergoing cancer treatment. So now with his presence tonight, the Republicans were able to get this impeachment over the finish line. Now, the Constitution says an impeachment is reserved for specific government officials who commit high crimes and misdemeanors. So what are the high crimes and misdemeanors Mayorkas has committed? According to the House Republicans, he willfully and systematically refused to comply with federal immigration laws, and he committed breach of public trust by knowingly making false statements to Congress and obstructing the oversight of his department. Republicans say Mayorkas is the one responsible for the chaos happening at the U.S.-Mexico border. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Mayorkas will never be convicted. The reason why is the Constitution specifically says the only body that can convict and have a government official removed from their office is the United States Senate. They can either hold a trial, like the ones we saw with former President Donald Trump, or they have procedures available to them to simply dispose of the House impeachment articles. And because the Senate is controlled by Democrats, they're already saying that's exactly what their plan is, to just dispose of these impeachment articles. Get rid of them. Make them disappear. But even if that effort is not successful, they will never move forward to convict Mayorkas because there just isn't enough votes. So in the end, Alejandro Mayorkas will not be removed from his job as Homeland Security Secretary. and nothing is really going to come of this. He is.
Wow. So you kind of see the dog and pony show is like, okay, he's impeached, but they don't really got enough power, the Republicans, to actually convict him because that's in the hands of Congress, right? So you heard it for yourself. So I started with those two videos just to give you kind of foundation, just in case you didn't know what exactly is taking place. Now, check these next videos out because it's going to explain as to why the Republicans were so adamant about actually getting rid of Alejandro Mayorkas. All right, check these out.
Why impeach Mayorkas?
Because he's violating the rule of law. In Federalist 65, Alexander Hamilton, keep in mind that, you know, those 85 Federalist papers, documented 1 through 85, that were written by John J. Hamilton Madison, that dictate what happened. What were they thinking when they put this Constitution in place? In Article 2, Section 4, it lays out what impeachment is supposed to look like. It actually says impeachment in Article 2, Section 4 is for the vice president, the president, or all civil officers of the executive.
Okay.
Well, what is Mayorkas? He serves under the executive, right? All right, so number one is the rule of law team. Conservatives, I ascribe to that. Do we have differences of policy? Absolutely we do. Does this need to be about the rule of law? Yes, because not only are we losing conservative common sense, we're losing rule of law, where people think that they are above the Constitution. The supreme law of our land is not, we're not under the rule of man, we're under the rule of law. So the Constitution lays out this is what impeachment's for. But the Constitution laid that out, and it had a context we know of, because Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 65 said that the reason what the impeachment is to be used for is a violation or abuse of the public trust. Then he goes on to say in Federalist 65 that it's to be a bridle. Now, I grew up in the cutting horse industry. I grew up training horses with a father who did it professionally. A bridle in the hands of the legislative body to be used upon the executive servants of the government. I mean, that's an exact quote from Federalist 65. You know what that means? You know what you use a bridle for? If you have a well-trained horse, you don't have to use that bridle very often, especially if you're in the reining cutting horse industry, because that horse learns to move off leg pressure and feels your seat. I learned as a non-pro, it's a 3-stage stop. I set down, that horse knows me saying whoa is about to happen, and a well-broke horse will set down and slide without me having to pick up the 4 ounces of the rein, right? Mm-hmm. Well, when the Constitution was written and everybody's horseback, they were horse savvy. And when he's saying that it's a bridle in the hands of the legislative body to be used upon the executives, the civil government executives, what they knew was you should be controlled by being well trained. Just like a horse, according to the American Quarter Horse Association, it says that a reining horse is to be willfully guided and willfully controlled. You know what you have in government these days? You have a lot of civil servants that aren't willfully guided and willfully controlled by the constraints of the rule of law of the Constitution or congressional law. So guess what? Our founders said we're going to give you, the legislative body, a bridle. You know what the bridle is used for? You don't sit down and start stopping on your own. When I sit down in my seat and I say whoa, then I have the bridle to get the curb chain in my hand and pull you back and say whoa. And so that's what is important that we do, and that's what's not been done. The reason why we have compounding lawlessness is because Congress doesn't use the power of the purse to say whoa. You used to have executive orders under Madison, Jefferson, and Adams when they were all president. They used executive orders one time in their entirety of their presidency. You know what on average executive orders are getting used by both Republican and Democrat presidents? 200 per their time in office. Franklin Roosevelt wrote 3,000 executive orders. We are in a culture of lawlessness. And so whatever you tolerate, you empower. It is time to sit down and grab the bridle and say, whoa.
Wow. You know, it's very interesting because notice the key word that he keeps using. He said that we are in a country of lawlessness. Now, obviously, him being a Republican and, you know, conservative, right? He is implying that the Democrats are allowing the country to enter a state of lawlessness, meaning that it's in a moral decay. You see, this is the problem, right? If there aren't any absolutes, right? There is no absolute right. There's no absolute wrong. It's all up to feelings, which is the way the Democrats, historically, that's how they speak, right? It's all about your truth. When you allow the Democrats to operate in such a manner, now you can see why Alejandro Mayorkas, you get what I'm saying, just because of feeling, not because of rationality, just because of feeling, and we want to help everybody. You open up the border and allow all these illegal immigrants to come in. They call them migrants now, right? They allow all these migrants to come in. Have you guys seen what's taking place in New York? Right, but matter of fact, let me reserve my comments because I did say I'm going to reserve for the end. All right, there's more. Check this out.
And that includes underage workers.
That is not what the New York Times investigation found. Mr. Chairman, I just ask at this point, I'd like to enter into the record the New York Times article, as migrant children were put to work, U.S. ignored warnings. This is from April 17th, 2023. This is this morning. And I'd also like to enter into the record the New York Times article, alone and exploited migrant children work brutal jobs across the U.S. This is from February 25th, 2023. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What these articles show, Mr. Secretary, is that the administration has done nothing but facilitate this crisis. You changed Title 42.
All right, so in this video, obviously it was a short snippet to show you that all in the name of, having safe asylum for, all these migrants, right? They were actually, the reports are showing that there were children, migrant children that were forced into child labor. You see, all these people that, they all for immigrants just coming in, but are you for that as well? You see, these are the harsh realities that people actually don't want to talk into, because they don't want to check these facts because it goes against their narrative. Oh, yeah, we just created a safe haven for all these people to come in. Oh, do you know the economy that's taking place in Venezuela? They're oppressed. They suffer in harsh times. They have no... all this stuff, right? So therefore, they play on your heartstrings to try to get these migrants to come into America. But now they're in America, and is it any better for them? Apparently not. If you're forcing children to, go into child labor, think about that, right? So what was all this talk about trying to create this safe haven? Is it safe for children to just be working in these factories? You see, again, these are the harsh realities, right? But check out this last video, because I think this would definitely be an eye-opener for all of us. Check this one out.
How many children have been sexually assaulted by human traffickers under the Biden administration?
Senator, this is precisely why we instituted...
I don't want a lecture. It's a question. How many children have been sexually assaulted by human traffickers under your administration?
Senator, this is exactly why on January 5th we announced the parole
Do you know how many? Do you know how many children have been sexually assaulted?
This is why...
Okay, you're going to refuse to answer that question as well. Let's move on. It's obvious you've been instructed to stonewall, so I'm not going to let you. You don't get to stonewall and filibuster. Now, one of my Democratic colleagues before said the Democrat talking point, quote, this problem didn't start under Biden. Look, I get if you're a partisan spinner, you got to figure out something to say about the absolute catastrophe that has played out under the Biden administration. True or false, Secretary Mayorkas, 2020 was the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. Is that true or false?
It is certainly the lowest level of immigration in many, many years. And what was it in 2020? What was it, Senator, in 2020 that impacted the entire world, including the United States?
Okay, so your testimony is the reason we had the lowest rate was COVID. It had nothing to do with building the wall, nothing to do with any catch and release, nothing to do with Remain in Mexico. With all respect, Mr. Secretary, that answer is laughable. And in fact, if you look at illegal immigration, let's look at CBP encounters. You can see 500,000, 500,000, it drops to the lowest level, and boom, what happens? You show up. And that red line is you. That red line is Joe Biden. And you're claiming nothing happened. Oh, gosh, this was here before us. No, you made the decision to allow this to happen. Let me ask you, we now have over 5.5 million people who've entered this country illegally under Joe Biden. How many murderers have you released into America?
Senator, I'm not aware of any murderer whom we've...
So you don't know?
Senator, let me say something.
Do you know?
If you take a look at...
No, you don't get to give a speech. Do you know how many murderers you've released?
I'm just trying to answer your question,
How many rapists
Senator.
have you released?
Senator, I'm trying
Do you
to
know?
answer your question.
You can answer, I know or I don't know.
Senator, any individual who poses a public safety threat.
How many child
is
molesters have you
detained
released?
and removed into the United States, from the United States.
Oh, so your testimony under oath, subject to perjury, is that you have not released any murderers, rapists, or child molesters among the 5.5 million. Is that your testimony?
Mercy, 5.5 million. They allowed 5.5 million people to enter into this country. This is great.
Mr. Chairman, may I have the opportunity?
No, you may not. You may answer my question.
You're not.
Is that your testimony, yes or no?
Senator, you're not allowing me to answer your question.
I am allowing you to answer. I'm not allowing you to filibuster.
If you take a look at the pace of immigration in 2018 to 2019,
you're refusing to answer. Let's move on. Let's move on to gotaways. Gotaways are the people that get away that you know about. Now, what happened under your administration? Gotaways consistently down at this low line. Boom, you get in. And they go from below 180,000 to 600,000. Now, I'll tell you this about a gotaway. You don't know, among those 600,000 a year, you have no idea how many are murderers, correct?
That is precisely why the
Correct?
number of gotaways.
Do you know how many of those are murderers?
That is precisely
So you
why.
refuse to answer the question. You know how many are rapists? Do you know how many are rapists? This is a question. You're a lawyer. You know how to answer questions. Of the 600,000, do you know how many of them were rapists?
Senator, this is why
So again,
are...
the answer is no. Let me ask you this. Do you know how many of them are terrorists? And I don't want to, Senator, here's my lecture on this. Do you know how many of the 600,000 gotaways were terrorists? Yes or no?
Senator, we are focused on the
You refuse to answer that as well.
You see, one thing that you guys have to understand, right? It's very common. It's a common tactic that liberals, Democrats use whenever they're asked questions. I mean, I've covered this on this channel many times, but whenever you ask them concrete questions, what they'll do is, as you know, Ted Cruz is mentioning, they filibuster. Right? They like to beat around the bush, mince words, but they never answer the questions concretely. We don't care about the explanation, which, truth be told, they're not going to explain a damn thing. Just answer the questions. You see, they don't like to answer the questions because they know if they were supposed to answer the question for what it truly is, they will start to realize, the public will start to realize how foolish they actually sound.
What's the result of massive gotaways? Well, one of the results is drug overdoses. And we now have, last year, over 100,000 overdoses who died, the majority from Chinese fentanyl streaming across the border. Now, you told Senator Cornyn you care, but look what has happened under your policy. When you open up the border to the worst illegal immigration in our nation's history, people die. You claim you care. Mr. Secretary, that is a lie. You know, some months ago, Karine Jean-Pierre stood up at a White House briefing and said, people are not just walking across the border. Was she telling the truth?
Senator, you are
Was she telling the
so
truth?
profoundly disrespecting.
Was she telling the truth?
Yes or no?
Okay, you get to answer questions. You don't
Senator,
get to give speeches.
Senator, I served as a federal prosecutor.
All right, you're
for 12
refusing
years.
to answer. If you look at, she was lying, and she was not lying on her own. She was lying on behalf of the President of the United States. Now, the photograph of people walking. She was lying on behalf of the President of the United States. This is a photograph from just one day along the Rio Grande of hundreds of thousands of people walking across the border. You have allowed this to happen. The photograph that was before, what are these wristbands?
I don't know what they are.
You
Senator.
don't know what they are. Mr. Secretary, you have just testified to the American people you're incompetent at your job, because I've been to the southern border, and if you go to the southern border, along the southern border, you see thousands of these wristbands because the illegal immigrants wear them. The drug cartels, every color corresponds to how many thousands of dollars they owe the cartels. You have turned these cartels into multi-billion-dollar criminal organizations, and these are modern-day leg irons, because these are children being sold into sex slavery, and you don't even know what they are. That is astonishing. Mr. Secretary, how many children have been sold into sex slavery under your administration?
Senator, we are taking it to the cartels.
How many children have been sold into sex slavery? Do you know how many children have been sold into sex slavery?
To an unprecedented degree.
Mr. Secretary, I want to say to you right now,
it is
your behavior is disgraceful, and the deaths, the children assaulted, the children raped, they are at your feet, and if you had integrity, you would resign. And I will tell you, the men and women of the Border Patrol, they've never had a political leader undermine them. They despise you, Mr. Secretary, because you're willing to let children be raped to follow political orders. This is a crisis. It's a disgrace, and you won't even admit this human tragedy is a crisis.
Claiming 1 minute chairman time, Mr. Secretary, would you like to respond to any of those questions?
What the senator said was revolting. I'm not going to address it.
Your refusal to do your job is revolting.
So there you have it, guys. I tried my best. I know I failed. I failed. I couldn't allow some of the things to be said without putting my input. But on a serious note, let's actually dive right into it, right? Let me actually preface everything I'm about to say by saying this, right? I am, even though I was born here in America, I am a child, a descendant of parents who were at one point in time immigrants. They have their citizenship. They have done it the right way. They've, got the citizenship, got educated through, the system, whatever the case may be. So we here legally, right? And here's the thing, right? I say all of that to say that I understand the sentiment. I understand the sentiment of trying to open up the borders, especially from the mindset of people who are immigrants, right? They understood how hard it was for them to actually come to America, and the life that they had to leave back home because things were probably rough and they probably didn't have good education over there. The economy wasn't good. I get all of that. So I don't want to sound insensitive to all these migrants who perhaps are genuinely looking for a better form of life. I don't want to sound insensitive to that. However, what Mayorkas has done, in my personal opinion, is that he has negligently allowed millions. According to the video that we played, it was 5.5 million people. He allowed 5.5 million people to enter into America unchecked. And as a result, you've allowed both the good and the bad. And let's keep it a buck, majority of it is bad. And I'm going to tell you why. Do you guys see what's taking place in New York right now? We got a bunch of migrants literally stealing. they literally robbing stores and then reselling it, to the people, making a living off of the hard-working Americans who actually are in this country, worked hard to make a living. They robbing from Americans so that they could provide for their illegal activity. Think about that. We saw videos where we have a bunch of children. Not only are they engaging in child labor, but now you child trafficking. You see, these are the things, again, we can allow our emotions to blind us from rationality. We must remain rational. And that's literally what we're dealing with in politics. You have the conservatives, right? The Republicans, right? They are just rational. Yes, we all have emotions, but we have to actually think. We got to think. Are we going to disregard the people of America for people who are not even citizens, all in the name of what exactly? Some type of humanitarian, effort? But there are literally lives, and through this so-called humanitarian effort, it's coming at the expense of Americans. So what about them? What about their livelihood? Going back to New York, you got the police officers literally getting beat up by these migrants. Illegal migrants. Does that make sense? What would happen now if you have a police force that's being attacked, is going unchecked? Would we have a police force in the future? We don't know. Who's gonna want to sign up for that? Who's gonna want to sign up to protect the American people when they're getting beat up and it's going unchecked? Again, this is just my personal opinion. Although my parents were at one point in time, immigrants, I understand the plight, I understand the struggle, but I'm absolutely all in, and I'm to be quite honest, I'm happy that Alejandro Mayorkas was impeached. Now, I will end off the video by saying this, right? Just as I showed you in the I believe it was the second or first video, I don't remember at this point. But as the woman mentioned, it's pretty much a dog and pony show. Because although he's impeached, and he definitely deserves to be impeached, he's not going to be convicted for nothing. All the child labor, all the child trafficking, the police being beat up, the people, stealing from the stores. I mean, all that illegal activity that he allowed to enter in because of his negligence is going to go completely unchecked. Why? Because Congress at this particular point in time is mostly ran by the Democrats, and they're not going to convict this guy. So what is really happening? Is it all theater? I don't know. But I'll say this. I do agree with him being impeached, but I would love to hear from you guys. Perhaps you have a different opinion on the situation. Let me know. I would love to hear from you guys. If you like the video, once again, please like, subscribe, comment down below, share with your family and friends. Perhaps it can educate them as well. But with that being said, Nick over and out. The message sent. Jesus is King, y'all.